Greetings. So, as the speed change proposed by Xexar is being pushed more and more by the community, I thought I would make a video on the concept of speed, and how speed relates to what is considered a good play in OS and rhythm games in general. Just a disclaimer, for the sake of simplicity, I am going to refer to players those appreciate speed plays as speed players, and those who appreciate technique and accuracy as accuracy players. I do not mean to target any player for their playstyle with those blanket terms, but it's going to be infinitely more simple to just use them, instead of things like players those value raw mechanical execution over technical control. So, to some people it feels like the speed rework is only not implemented into the game because it would be too controversial. Some players believe the speed plays would get buffed too high, while others think that things such as double tapping and vibro plays are too much of an issue to push such an update forward. The supporters of the speed change, however, feel like that speed plays are too underrated, and since the solution is right in front of us, why don't we just implement it already? These two conflicting viewpoints shed light to a bigger issue, mainly to the different ideas to what is considered a good play. In a previous tweet of mine, I took the hardliner critical approach to speed plays and suggested that speed plays need to be slowed down to average BPM, and if they look more and more indistinguishable from plays actually made at that BPM, then they can be considered as or more impressive as some speed players want them to be. By completely rejecting this idea, the standard for theoretical perfect play gets lowered, allowing for some not so perfect execution to slip in, especially if it's not done on the sections speed players regard the most important. Of course, there is an even more hardliner approach than that, which claims that speed is absolutely irrelevant, and stretching the human limits is contrary to how rhythm games should be played. I don't really agree with that for a number of reasons, but I'm willing to consider that viewpoint in order to better understand what do they mean by it, and maybe, learn a few things along the way. The reactions confirm my suspicions that speed players and players those appreciate raw speed plays have vastly different ideas to what is considered a good play. And on top of that, they reject any kind of criticism based on arguments such as, "You just don't understand the difficulty of doing everything the same but faster." Which kind of reminds me when mappers argue that players don't have valid opinions whether a map is good or not, because they just don't understand mapping. If I wanted to be really nasty and reductive like most of the people in my replies, I could even say that speed players are just lazy and don't want to get good in aspects other than speed. But I do realize that their confusion only comes from their values. Those don't consider certain things necessary for making good plays. Of course, both cases boil down to perspective, and both perspectives are right, since both are based on subjective value systems. But what exactly does this contrarian big brain veto mean by these both perspectives nonsense? Well, let's get into that right now, shall we? Speed players often have a niche appreciation for raw speed plays. Often, this means that speed players are looking to maximize the speed aspect of their plays, while minimizing other aspects, minimizing aim, pattern complexity, accuracy, and so on. I know that this is not always the case, but this is the biggest part where speed and non-speed players differ. Pushing the boundaries of physical human limits will always mean that there will be some loss of control in the process. So in cases of plays like that, the execution will not be as perfect as on high-level normal BPM plays. Speed players will appreciate these limit-pushing plays the most, even if raw speed is the only aspect that is impressive about it. Their perception of a good play doesn't necessarily require perfect finger control and consistency, and sometimes those things would even prevent the limit-pushing plays from being made. Of course, speed plays those are impressive in other aspects as well will be considered great by speed players, too. But raw speed is what interests these players the most, so plays those push the human limits with not so perfect technique will be hyped more than less speedy plays those are executed perfectly. This will make outsiders to the speed scene believe that that's what speed plays are all about, dismissing all of them, or at least not respecting them as much as speed players would want them to. And by not so much perfect technique, obviously I do not mean double tapping and vibroing. They are shunned upon even more so by speed players for circumventing the real speed skills required for the plays. Universally perfect technique would mean executing speed plays with the same solid technique as normal BPM plays. Let's say, such as 190 BPM plays. since that seems to be the most comfortable for most players. I will talk about what that means exactly from a technical standpoint, but first let's see why accuracy players don't appreciate speed plays all that much. I know Oath isn't really considered a proper rhythm game, but that's not entirely the fault of the design of the game itself. Partly it is, since Oath emphasizes the mechanical elements much more than the rhythmical elements. Things such as raw aim, speed, etc. But that doesn't mean Oath Standard cannot have rhythmically complex elements in it. Many maps do, and usually executing these maps require perfect technique and control. Accuracy players appreciate these types of plays much more than raw speed plays. For them, speed doesn't really mean anything unless they are executed with proper technique. If you view Oath plays like plays on a musical instrument, then raw accuracy, reading, and rhythm complexity will be the most important factors when deciding what is a good play. After all, if you listen to a piano cover, you want it to sound as perfect as possible. Speed is only relevant if the player won't stumble accidentally on some notes. Take Taiko for example. Yes, I know that they don't have to deal with things such as aiming, but Taiko is pretty much the raw speed game mode. Yet the average execution of these speed plays in Taiko is on a much higher technical level than in Standard. Even on 300 plus BPM maps, with 1/6 bursts, it is very rare that an FC is below 99%, and the unstable rates are just as solid as well. Without understanding Taiko, you might say that the OD is also lower, so of course they can get higher accuracies. But Taiko hit windows are actually much smaller than in Standard, and it doesn't even have 50 hits. The sliders in Taiko are much different as well. They are very rare and don't contribute anything to the combo nor the accuracy. I know it's not completely right comparing different rhythm games, but Taiko proves that the general mentality also affects the overall quality of the plays. Now back to Standard. As we discussed, speed is only secondary, if even relevant at all, in the accuracy player perspective. This is only compounded by the fact that the hit windows work against the accuracy players on lower BPM. As you can see, lower BPM has bigger gaps between their hit windows, so they require more finger control to accurately hit. Such low BPM finger control is pretty much irrelevant to speed players, since they put more emphasis on speed. But for accuracy players, the reduced gaps mean that higher BPM requires less raw accuracy. This is kind of the reason why DT works the way it does. It does not exactly increase the overall difficulty, but it does decrease the hit windows relative to the speed increase. This doesn't mean that the faster the map is, the easier it is to hack. It obviously doesn't mean that, come on. There are other things that affect the end result in accuracy, even if they aren't directly linked to accuracy. But this also doesn't mean that raw mechanical difficulty unrelated to accuracy should be rewarded with more accuracy PP. After all, they are unrelated. But we are getting sidetracked, so... Does this mean that accuracy players will just scoff at anything that is fast? Some of them will, but the vast majority will not. As I said, it's pretty much a hardliner approach. The main problem with accuracy players have with speed plays is that aspects those are the most important to them are sacrificed in order to increase the speed. Speed players believe the complete opposite. They see lower BPM plays as plays those lack the most important element, speed. If those plays were high enough BPM, they would appreciate them much more. This is where balancing the PP system will be the most difficult. How are you going to balance speed when one type of player will say that the most basic maps on high BPM are going to be overrated, while the other will say that physical strain needs to be reflected in the BP system? Both of them are right from their own perspective, but their values are almost absolutely incompatible with each other. Buffing speed plays will obviously make them more relevant, so more people will take notice of them, but that is true for pretty much anything. You can make any type of play relevant, as long as you award them a lot of PP. But that doesn't mean the lack of PP is the only reason why speed plays are being overlooked. As a speed player, you scoff at even just considering the idea that speed plays might not be as great as you perceive them to be, even though some of those plays lack any other skill aspects. If much lower skilled players can do those maps perfectly on lower BPM, why do you feel personally offended when some other players don't consider the faster versions of those exact plays as impressive as you want them to? The whole point of slowing down the play, thus taking away the only impressive part of it, is that if it still holds up as a properly executed play, then the play is objectively impressive, since you can do absolutely everything that other players can, but on a speed that is physically impossible for them. That is the core of what makes a speed play impressive. Don't just assume I meant that speed plays are worth the same at 180 BPM as they worth on 270. Regardless, let's move on to actual problems those are threatening speed from being properly measured by the PP system. The biggest one is double tapping. The problem with double tapping is that it completely circumvents how speed is being measured by the PP system. It is very similar to how touchscreen circumvents aim by removing the object you need to physically drag across the play area to reach the notes. Yeah, but what about alternating? If you really wanted to make a comparison, alternating is a bit like TapX, but single tapping speed is a much different issue. Aim speed already reflects the speed required for that. So I'm not really interested in discussing that right now. So, as such, the best solution to double tapping is creating a double tap detection system similar to touchscreen detection. Except this time we could learn from the mistakes those were made with the touchscreen detection and improve on them. And no, the mistakes weren't things like, the touchscreen nerf was too harsh, now look at all these poor touchscreen players losing motivation because they cannot compete on a PP system that wasn't designed for their device. Now the only thing they can do is play for pure fun, or farm rank 1 on touchscreen maps because the scoring wasn't affected at all. Similarly to the touchscreen rework, double tap would give a huge punishment to the speed PP. This way we wouldn't need to do indirect solutions such as nerfing low accuracy plays on speed maps. I mean, we can still do that, so proper execution is encouraged even on speed plays, but don't do it because of double tapping. Double tapping is a speed issue, not an accuracy issue. Given low enough OD and or high enough BPM, theoretically you can assess streams with double tapping. And if you can do something theoretically, then you can bet your ass someone will do it as long as you give them enough PP for it. The only feasible counter-argument against such system is from coding perspective. But if we could get a touchscreen detection, I'm hoping we can code something that detects nodes being abnormally bunched together as doublets. Also, we wouldn't be able to apply the double tap detection to every single play, which is, yeah, it's an actual problem, since a lot of the replays are gone. However, unless someone finds a better way to directly punish double tapping, we should just consider those plays lost causes. You can punish them indirectly by using unstable rate or accuracy, but that's going to cause more problems in the long term. Look, I want speed plays to be properly weighted by the PP system as much as the next guy, but we will also have to deal with possible abuses one way or another. Before we finish, I also want to talk about the attitude people had towards me and my recent tweets. I understand that the core demographic of the game is pretty young, so I cannot expect all of them to be having decent reading comprehension or critical thinking skills, but the amount of knee-jerk, toxic responses is just unbelievable. Even if my claim would have been absolutely outlandish, this kind of lashing out is not warranted for any kind of civil argument. I'm hugely disappointed in the community and I hope we can do better. I didn't change any of my core arguments in this video from my original tweets. I just had more space to express them properly. If you believe that I backed down from it, then you probably did not understand anything from the tweets and just judged the contents by the replies. I also haven't made any personal claim in my tweets. I appreciate speed plays for what they are, but I also understand the accuracy player perspective I just laid down earlier in the video. The only claim I made in these tweets is that I believe that there could be other reasons why the community doesn't appreciate speed plays as much as speed players want them to be, other than not understanding them, or them not being worth as much PP. Good speed plays are very underrated, it says right there in my original tweets. But bad or even mediocre speed plays might not be as underrated as actual good speed plays. I hope that's enough to clear things up. See you next time.